That's consent month now. And that's because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we wanted to kind of bracket it, have April Sexual Assault Awareness, and we thought September was a great month because that's when college students are coming in. They've had time to do their orientation, and then we have a whole month of consent month. And NCSF did this with Arizona Power Exchange. We love to work with individuals and groups who are doing projects. We kind of put our resources behind it. They bring people to work on it. And so we have consentmonth.com. We have bracelets over there, the little black bracelets that have consentmonth.com on them. And we do a photo contest. The winner of the photo contest last year is now the cover of the bar card that we used for this consent summit. And so people are already starting to submit photos about consent. We have one where she's breathing on a shower panel, and she wrote consent. You can just see her lips and consent. And it was like, that's a great message. We want to try to get more visual messages out there about consent. So, just to hit people from every different direction on what it is. We also are encouraging people to hold an event in Consent Month. And so we want every group, I know that the center was really active last year in Consent Month. It was wonderful. And I'm sure that you're going to be active again this year. So that's just a project that we do, and we want to hear about other people's projects. So I'll let you all introduce yourselves and just talk a little bit about a project that you've done.
Let's start over there.
Okay, we'll start with Cassie. I'm sorry, Toby.
Hi.
Yes, hi.
Yes. So there was some confusion. I was asked to speak here, but apparently my information wasn't included in the panel.
Oh.
So anyway, I'm here today. My name is Toby Hillmeyer, and I do a bunch of different things. I want to talk to you today specifically about some thoughts that I've had around consent and the workplace. And around my film production company, Handbasket Productions, and making porn. And so one of the things, wait, first let me check in, how much time do I have?
Just a few minutes, because we want to try to get everything in the
I'm just distinguishing like 45 seconds and 5 minutes.
No, I would say like 3 minutes.
Yeah. No problem. 2 to 3. So, so basically, one of the things that came up when I started producing porn is all of these questions around sexual harassment and sexuality in the workplace that typical trainings and information out there don't really cover. I'm remembering back when I was in college, I went to a sexual harassment training where they said, like, never ever hug your coworkers. A handshake is plenty. And that doesn't really apply to porn. And so, like, trying to actually figure out some of these different dynamics around, like, when is what appropriate, how does it work if I want to work with my partners, how does it work if I want to hire my partners, and all of these different questions, which I don't claim to have concrete answers to, but I found myself having to throw out the existing rule book and kind of start fresh. And so I've been kind of recently working on kind of documenting some of my own ideas around that and how that works. And it's going to be submission to the upcoming anthology.
So I'm Ashley Hammond. I'm a doctoral student at the Widener University Center for Human Sexuality Studies and Disabilities. Susan contacted me over the summer to develop a training for people who work in violence prevention services, sort of talk about what is BDSM and how do you deal with clients who come to you who may not know if they're being abused or they might be being abused under the guise of BDSM. So I've done webinars now. They last about 4 hours each for about 50 people. And then I'm going to have to stop early May because my semester is over. But I have probably another 40 people remaining to go through. So, what does BDSM and abuse look like in this particular context? And a lot of the work that I've been doing is with therapists, actually. We're very interested in what kind of questions can you ask people to elicit this type of information. So we talk about a lot of that, and then we talk about case studies of people who've actually come to the NCSF for help. We've had people from all over the world, North America, Australia, Hong Kong, UK and Germany, and even South Africa and Israel. And to a person, they said that there's a need for this education in their countries and in their professions. There's been a lot of interest about power dynamic relationships and the consensual, negotiated, non-egalitarian type of relationships. And how do you distinguish those from an abusive relationship that might also have a power differential? So one of the ways that I've thought to explain that, perhaps, is that an abusive relationship, sort of like no offense to oceans, but you're sort of wading into the ocean, right? It keeps getting a little bit deeper and a little more severe. In a consensual non-egalitarian relationship, maybe called master-slave or dominant-submissive, there's a start date. There's a negotiation beforehand. So it's not wading into an ocean, it's, the start of the date and time. Let's see what else. So this has been beneficial for people in their practices. I had one therapist who was concerned about a dynamic a client was presenting to her with her boyfriend. And after having gone through the training, she realized that that was a pretty healthy negotiated dynamic. And then also, we had some victim services people talk about updating their materials to include power dynamic relationships. How you include those. So it's been a pretty good project.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Katie Stryker. First, before I go on, I want to acknowledge my privilege as white, cis, femme presenting, middle-class passing femme. I'm going to be speaking through that lens. So when I'm talking, that is speaking from my experience. That's not necessarily experiences across the board. I'll also be speaking through the lens of being a survivor of sexual and physical abuse. Speaking through the lens of being a sex worker since I was 18, being queer, and being a social justice activist. I've been a feminist since I was 5, sex worker since I was 18, and I founded Consent Culture at 27. Since then, I've been an advocate between survivors and police. I've manned phones with the London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard. I've been an active part of the BDSM community for 14 years. Kind of working on my first book about consent culture through Florida Free Press, which I plan to make very intersectional and talk about consent culture influencing multiple spheres, not just the sphere of sexuality, but also consent culture as it relates to jails, the workplace, the prison industrial complex, which is the jail, and hospitals, that sort of thing, as well as bedroom dynamics and home dynamics. I kind of was joking that I might be one of the more radical people on this board because I do not use the police in my activism at all. A lot of the people who work with me don't trust the police and have very good reasons for that. So I mostly focus on restorative justice. I use a lot of a group called Insight, their work and their processes as a way of informing my own processes within alternative sexual communities. But with that in mind, I also recognize that there's a need for multiple approaches in order to deal with consent issues across the board and through different spheres of privilege. Thank you.
My name is Joy Sodio, and I work for the YWCA. I'm Director over Domestic Violence Specialized Services. We primarily work with women and children. Our experience in domestic violence, sexual assault relationship. We also have a special project that we've been working on, not special, but it's a pilot, and 3 years in. So it's a good pilot, working with women who have been commercial and sexual exploited. And so that has been a very interesting project, working with women who are either in the sex worker field of some type, whether it's a back pay, prostitution, survivor sex, however way that it may come about, and we have been able to provide services to these women and men. We have had a few men also. We have had some folks with LGBTQ, and so being able to provide supportive services that they know that there's other ways of being, if that's what they chose to want at this time. We have served in this 3-year project, in the last 3 years, it's about 167 women, and I think on it out is about 3 male and I think 2 transgender. And so the services we offer try to get them connected to housing, food, whatever the need may be. Showing them that there's a different way, not showing, but providing that resource, that if they make that choice, there is another way of being, Some of our women have, that this is all that they know. They grew up with sexual abuse, they grew up with child abuse, they've been prostituted out, they've been trafficked. And so, although human trafficking becomes a bigger area of labor or all those things, we primarily focus on that piece.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mercy Stackhouse. I am a cosplayer and costumer and burlesque and variety performer and an activist. I got into, I started identifying myself as an activist when I was 12. And I began performing when I was professionally when I was 8. But I was on stage whenever I could be for too long. So I founded a group called Cosplay, so Causeplay. We are a group of cosplayers who do awareness and charity work around a bunch of different things. And our most recent project that we're just starting is a consent project that kind of came from the whole consent, cosplay is not consent project that's been going on all over the place. And with what we kind of came up with was that as human beings and as cosplayers, as whoever you are and whatever shoes you walk in, consent is so much more than just a sexual thing or about sexual harassment or street harassment or things like that. It's about me walking down the street looking how I do is not consent for you to give me your opinions about me. Or anything expanding on that. So we started a meme campaign, which we will talk about. I have some.
Let's see your memes.
These. So I didn't come with these, and I had to kind of really quickly go and get copies, and the printer was running out of ink, so excuse the line. But this one. And it says, my confidence and sexual awareness is not consent. Stop slut shaming. These are just the first 4 or 5 that we have so far. This is me at work. Says, my cleavage is not consent to touch or to comment on or to veer at. More of the same thing. My sexuality is not consent. My state of undress does not take away my right to say no. My job is not consent. I am not inferior, a sex object, or a terrorist. And my skin is not consent, not its color or how much it's showing. So.
That's great. I like that last one. It's not the color or how much it's showing. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tristan Caramino, and I access consent activism through a number of different places. Today, I want to talk specifically about consent in sexual spaces. So if you were at my keynote, I touched on this. I produced this event called Dark Odyssey from 2003 to 2011, and one of the ideas behind it was that we were bringing people together from all these different sexual minority communities. So it really, in 2003, believe it or not, hadn't yet happened, that people who are into BDSM and leather, sex-positive people, polyamorous people, swingers, all these folks wouldn't really hang out in the same space together. They kind of all had their own thing. And so we wanted to create this amazing, melting pot. That should have been our clue right there. Of all the different people who have overlapping desires and ideas.
And the big challenge in that, and I'm glad someone talked about this in the legal panel right before us, someone was talking about like swinger etiquette and touching, around touching. It's a big challenge when you bring together people from different communities is that they have a set of sort of guidelines that their community has schooled them on, and they're all different. And even though we think of ourselves as like sexual radicals or super evolved or whatever it is, when you put all those people in the same space, actually a lot of shit can go wrong. It can. And so one of the things that I did as producer was I instituted this orientation, and then I made everyone go. Because another thing that happens is like there's always this orientation for like new people. So the people who've been in the scene for 10 years or 20 years are like, no. Consent? No, I have that. I've got that. When? They don't really, right? And so it's sort of like trying to make everyone go to orientation and talk about these issues and know what the expectations were, no matter if you were a presenter or you were a producer or you were a brand new player. But trying to sort of basically create a culture in this space that was made up of all these different subcultures. And the way that you get people to do things when you tell them they're mandatory is you pay them. No, here's the thing. We had these things called cherry pins, which were highly, highly coveted pins that had to do with the whole cultural thing at Dark Odyssey. People wanted them, and they were $5, and you got a free one if you went to orientation. You'd be shocked at how many people show up for $5. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. Great. Thank you all for coming for this. So the first question is, what approaches and tactics do you see as most effective in activism about consent or sexual violence prevention? Some of these examples could be educational speaking and writing, public demonstrations. We get civil disobedience in there, lobbying legislators and public officials, public statements by people, which I think can have a big effect, and participation in court cases. So, like, what are you thinking? What's most effective for you? Are you reaching out to people? Kitty already said she doesn't use the legal system, and that's certainly a viable option to make those choices.
For our project, we use the legal system, and mainly because what has happened for whatever in the day was women who were prostituting, they were arrested as if they were the ones that were doing something wrong, and the buyers and the traffickers were not held accountable at all. So with the city of Seattle right now, women who are arrested for prostitution or pulled over for it, they are now offered support services opposed to being arrested. We now have a buyer's class, the city of Seattle. So if the buyer or the trafficker gets arrested, they now have to attend a John School class because they have this concept about women that are in prostitution or worthless. They don't matter. Nobody knows that they're missing or being reported. And so with that, we have a task force. And we have the city attorney's office, we have the King County prosecutor's office, we have the Seattle Police Department, we have different programs, the Y, offices, organizational prostitution survivors, we have REST. And all of these partnerships that we are working with these women, but also with the court system to not fill the jails up with women who are in the light. And so that has been a big piece. It's only happening right now in Seattle. We're trying to stretch it. Policy changes with other court systems that will allow women a chance to get supportive services opposed to being put into jail. So it's been a long time coming. There's still a lot of work to be done on it, but that is something that's in progress right now.
Okay, thanks.
I would say that a lot of the work that I do around consent is from a situation where people don't necessarily understand, and that people may have the best intentions or want to act with integrity, and oftentimes it gets into these areas where some people are saying, well, your consent doesn't count in that case. And it's an interesting question to all people involved. Like, wait a minute, if I just got told my consent doesn't count in this case, like, should I not do that even though I want to do that? And so I think a lot of what I end up doing is having personal conversations with people about actually trying to get to the underlying situation and not the general rules. And once you actually start talking with people about what is acting with integrity and attempting to be ethical, then it gets people to that situation where they're not just doing a checklist of I can do this in this situation, I can't do this in that situation, and instead are interacting with the people around them as full human beings and thinking about how their behavior and actions impact all the people around them. And those are the kinds of things that really I find most effective in one-on-one with people who want to do good.
I think so. I would say two things. I'm all about education. One issue that you run into is that some of the people who need the education don't know that they need the education, and they're not going to seek it out. Another thing that I found with the training is you're bringing together people who are in part of the key community, who aren't, who work in mental health, who then other people who work in victim services. You can get some really good group discussions going. And I think group dynamics are very powerful, and people can learn from one another across disciplines. So I think that is a good area for activism, is bringing different people together and talking and learning from one another.
That's a great point. Even Doris was saying, I'm not sure. I don't know about kink, and you know, but I was like, we really need to have your perspective here. We really need to have everybody's perspective here. I think that's the thing that's kind of bringing stuff up for us is to hear from other people in the community.
Personally, a lot of my activism comes out through writing. I write a lot, and you know, I think that I try to embrace the conversation about consent in everything that I'm writing, regardless if it seems like it's immediately linked. Though also I try to demonstrate by showing. I try to have workshops, or when I do performances, I try to include consent negotiations as a part of that. One of the things that I found happens a lot is people are like, oh, well, yeah, sure, we should have a conversation about consent, but it's not sexy. Like, oh, it ruins the mood. And I mean, granted, my partners are used to like having a legal checklist, kind of like sit down, you know, business meeting kind of conversation. But in general, I think that it is a fair critique of a lot of these, that we don't really have many demonstrations or examples of how to make consent a fluid part of your flirtation. So I try to do workshops around that. I try to show that in my porn. I like to include in the porn that I make, you know, areas where something goes wrong, and we negotiate that and we figure that out. A very silly example is I was doing a food play scene with another performer, and I was teasing her with a piece of pizza. And I was like asking her, like, oh, do you want this pizza? Do you want this pizza? And she laughed. She said, yes, there's a wig hair on it. And I teased her a little bit with the wig hair, but I included that in porn because I thought that showed this very dynamic and exciting and playful way that, like, there was a negotiation that happened, and it was brief, and it didn't include everything that was going on, but, like, that's how you could begin to normalize the experience of that consent negotiation, and I'd say probably a lot of my activism is around that. The other side of that is I often get called upon to sort of act as a judge about whether or not things are okay, and I'm a lot less comfortable with that because I'm just one person. But I try to make myself available to play parties, to talk to hosts about what kind of trainings they could getting or giving to their other hosts around consent, around ways in which you can make a space more friendly to consent, how their marketing may encourage or discourage consent for certain groups of people. So I just sort of, basically everything I do, there's a consent framework around it, and it gets talked about.
You want to say anything?
I mean, I want there to be every time, I'm not gonna answer.
I'll just say that I want to echo education, and with cosplay in particular, we do that a lot through social media, which is huge. And yeah, it can lead for wackiness, but also like just knowing that putting out like memes like this or writing a blog or whatever that has to do with consent or any of the other myriad things that we talk about, that just knowing that whoever, even if it's a handful of people that suddenly are like, I've been doing this wrong, or I've been doing this right, or, oh, that's what was happening there. Like, just knowing that that's happening is awesome. And, you know, and so we use that as well as, like, one-on-one and panel discussions and stuff like that. So I feel like education is so huge.
I think education is definitely huge, but I want to bring up one thing that has been, when we talk about public demonstrations, because I was kind of involved in this, was on FetLife. I think that there was a lot of public demonstrations on FetLife in 2012, people really speaking out about consent violations, and I think that that really became kind of a public uprising in some ways on FetLife. And FetLife came to NCSF and asked us to help, and to reach out to try to be talking to these people to find out what's going on. And so we arranged a series of workshops at different events where FetLife people came and talked to the people that were there, and they were able to ask a question. And we found that, unfortunately, a lot of people didn't show up for those kinds of conversations in person, which is a great way to actually work these things out, is when you're in person, you can get over the ambiguity. But even through that, even despite all that, I think that FetLife, that civil disobedience on FetLife, really raised awareness within the kink community about consent violations. It was extremely important. I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, the drama on FetLife. No, you should be grateful for that we actually have this wonderful resource where we can all get on and talk about it. And sure, it was messy and it got horrible. It got horrible in the NCSF groups for a while as well. But you know what? All of that, we've embraced it because it really has brought us to this point where we're finally talking about a lot of these issues. And we're still seeing on FetLife that it's coming out about serial predators, the people who are doing serial abuse. That's real. We're able to really start pinpointing people who are doing that. Educators, people are calling educators out. So it's a wonderful public discourse, and we have to keep this public as well and give a lot of different people options. Okay, so the next one. How are you reaching out to bring diversity to your projects, the anti-sexual violence or the consent projects? You know, what is known as bringing an anti-oppressive framework to your activism? Because we have a problem in the kink community, reaching out and being diverse. We're wonderfully diverse in orientation. We get het, bisexual, transgender, we get gay and lesbian, we get pansexual, the non-labeled, but we still have trouble reaching out to like the Latino community in Arizona. We have a wonderfully huge Latino population, but when we come to the local event, we just don't see them showing up. And so that's part of our challenge, is how can we reach out to bring more diversity in.
Well, I'd like to speak this, but in the interest of walking the walk, I would like to allow anyone who's a person of color to speak for me. There you go. And in fact, there are people of color on this panel. So.
There are. And yeah, there's two of us. I thought it was three of us. There's three of us. Oh, so there is. I can tell that by looking at you. You can't always. Sometimes you can. You know, it's a tricky one. I've sat in so many like meetings and things where people are trying to figure out how do we do this without like coming off as racist or this or that, whatever. I think, one, if you have advertising, make sure that it's everywhere, not just in certain areas, because I think sometimes the idea, especially when it comes to like a lot of alternative stuff, is that because what we see in the media and all that stuff, that's just white folks and that's white folks do that, and nobody else does that, which is obviously not true. So, I don't know, I feel like that's number one, is make sure that you are reaching out in that way. If you have people of varying ethnicities or what have you that are part of the group that is trying to find more people, like, talk to them and see if they're comfortable going out and talking to their own communities, things like that. Because I just know from personal experience, if I have somebody else of color approach me about something, that oftentimes I've shown up at things and felt very like the only one, that already gives me incentive to show up, because I know that I won't be.
I would say, don't create a white event and ask people of color to come to it. I think a lot of times people, especially when you have your organization, your group, and you look around and you feel like there's a major lack, and you're like, how can we get people to come to this? And maybe, it's almost always, there's a reason why they're not coming. And I think one of the things that can be really effective is to not focus so much on getting people to come to your event, and instead go to their event. Different communities have different sets of issues and experiences around any topic, and that's certainly true for consent. And so if you start looking for what kinds of consent projects other groups are doing and see how you can get involved in their projects, if you can start going to their projects, then you can build partnerships and start working from there. But I think it's key to actually make sure that when you are putting together your events and your projects and your groups, that you try to invite people not just to attend, but to participate in structuring it. And oftentimes, if you're asking people who have no connection to your organization to come and fill out the diversity of your organizing group, like, pay them. Give them a stipend, because I don't want to show up to an organization that knows nothing about my name so that I can try to lobby their organizing group to stop being as bad as they already are. That's not fun, that's work. And so, I'm happy to see the outcome of doing that work, but it'll make a huge difference if you offer people stipends for doing that work. Call it consulting, whatever you want. But that's how you can make sure that your events, your organizations are going to be more inclusive, and then that opens the door so that people can attend.
So I'm just going to talk about what's worked for me, and obviously these aren't like all the solutions, but I think that every decision you make, you have to ask yourself, like, who is this benefiting? Who is this for? And I don't care if it's like who's on the website or who's presenting. It's sort of like at every single level, you have to continually, for me as a white person, I have to continually say, okay, what things am I reinforcing here and who am I excluding? You also have to put people, you have to invite and put people of color in positions of power in your organization. So I think one of the problems right now is like the majority of kink events are run by white people and their friends who are white. And it's exactly like Toby said. And then they're like, where are the people of color? It's like, exactly, look at yourselves. So you have to put people of color in positions of power. You have to have people of color being presenters, doing events. And then the tactic that's worked the best for me is to ask people of color what they need. What do you need in order to come here? Like, for this to feel like a good space, a safer space, a fun time, and then see what they say, because I think we also make assumptions as white people about what other people need or want, and they're just not always true. I agree that I feel like there has to be an economic justice piece to this. I'm doing that right now. Like I have an event that I'm doing at Woodhull, and if you're a part of the Women of Color Sexual Health Network, which is a big organization, you get 50% off admission to my class. Because like we have to admit that like women of color sex educators, like if sex educators are devalued and not even being paid for their work, women of color sex educators are getting less jobs and are being paid less. So there has to be an economic justice to it, and you have to like think about it kind of at every single level.
Yeah, I mean, I think marketing materials has been really important in a lot of the stuff that I do. Not just looking at websites, but also flyers. Like if I'm putting out flyers, I want to make sure that there's a lot of different alternative flyers that are all representative in different ways. That's been very important. I ran a group called Kinky Salon London, and we made sure that any public photos were inclusive. And that way we could ensure that when the media did something about us, they couldn't pick a picture from our website that wasn't inclusive, which they would do if they had the opportunity. So that really helped in terms of making it feel like, okay, there are people who come to this, and it's not just like the one token person who's in all of these pictures. It's a diverse group of people. That was very important. Also, artwork. If you have a space that has artwork, make sure that your artwork is representative. And not all, white, cis, skinny, able-bodied people, because a lot of people who go to these parties don't fit that. So it's nice to go into a space and see yourself represented. I think that that's a really vital part of this. I've also been doing a lot of work about stepping back and stepping up. When I get asked to speak about consent, I will generally see if I can find somebody else local who would be available to do that instead of me. And I offer that if they're not available or if they don't want to do it, that's totally fine. You can totally hit me up. But here are some other people who are doing this work as well. You should ask them first. And that, by giving up some of my power and being asked in the first place, that's allowing them to have a platform that they might not otherwise have access to. Working with local groups, hugely important. There's a lot of local groups that are more focused on these communities and may have a completely different lens to what you expect or what you've learned. And I think that by working with other groups, that's been a really helpful way to pick up different ways to talk about consent, different ways to educate about consent. So that's been a useful aspect. Donating, marginalized groups doing similar work, because the financial part is real. Like, a lot of these groups don't get paid or don't get paid enough. They generally need resources, and it can be a huge boon, really, to signal boost what work they're doing and work with them as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel yourself. And I definitely agree that it's good to go to other events, but definitely ask if that would be awesome too, because it isn't always, and you don't want to put yourself in a position where other people feel like, oh no, like this white person's here, now we have to educate them, or this person's here, now we have to educate them. Great. So ask if that would be okay. And then don't talk, just listen. Like, that's probably the biggest piece.
Well, I'm a Black woman. And when we're looking for women of color to do this work, because primarily most time in domestic violence, it's most of the time a woman advocate, right? There are a couple of male advocates out there, not a whole lot. And so we are going to trying to go to places where the people are. So with our CSE project, we're going to where we know women of color be. And being a woman of color myself, I like to get my hair done. And so I'm in the hair shop a lot, and that's where a lot of black women are. I like to get my nails done. A lot of black women are. And so I'm reaching out to certain places in the church, in different places. We are, for me, trying to recruit just staff of color. It's a hard piece sometimes. To now, I have to go out and encourage people sometimes to come into the field because we need people like us. We want our clients to see people that look like them. And so it's not an easy process, but I have to be honest with you. This is my first, anything that I'm first talking to Susan, and correct me if I'm BDSM. This is my very first time hearing really about it. And I didn't know anything about kinky sex. When I heard kinky sex coming from my generation, that was just what it was, kinky sex. I didn't know a whole lot. This was a learning piece for me today. I thank Susan for inviting me because I love to learn something new as much as I can, every day if I can. So this is all very interesting, and I just wanted to put that piece up.
We're glad you're here.
Welcome.
Come back tonight.
Great. It's great to take a step in. So we have a question here in the audience, and we have a question online, so we'll ask the question in the audience, and then we'll go on.
Okay, my question is regarding the just previous topic, and it's probably mostly addressed to you, Susan. So we talked about disclosures on FetLife and how that was a good thing, but I'm concerned about the other side of that as well. We talked today about looking at BDSM as a sexual assault law because of the protections it would offer the abuser, the victim. So I'm concerned about on FetLife, what about victim or accuser privacy issues, about the thought of the preponderance of the evidence, which would probably what would happen in a public forum versus a reasonable doubt legal standard. Do we have a framework for resolution? What guidelines and conduct for public airing? When is it a witch hunt, and are we trying to court of public opinion? So I'm being provocative here and devil's advocate.
Okay, that's a great question. I actually wrote several pieces about this in terms of how do you handle it when somebody publicly discloses on FetLife. And I think that the best thing to do is to not have everybody chime in. It's not for you to say, oh, this person is a great person, I know they would never do that. You know, that's discounting what the person coming out and the survivor is saying about what happened to them. And it turns much more into a back and forth. I think that the back and forth is not as productive, but I think that we do see that done very productively. Somebody will come out and post something, hey, I've been accused of consent violations. I feel very bad about this. I want to, offer my apologies. I want to do better. I want to find out more about this. We're seeing that over and over again in all different areas of the country, people standing up and saying, this is happening, and I feel very bad about it, and I want to learn, and I want to move on. That's a great way to handle it. When you go on FetLife and just start this person's accusing me, and they're completely crazy, and then they come on and they have to defend themselves, that's not very productive. But I think it's exactly equatable to what I said in the plenary. Extremism is a great way to break through the wall of cultural blindness. And what we saw with FetLife in the very beginning, and for a couple of years, was we had to be extreme to break through that wall and to get this out there and to get people talking about it. People really tried to silence the discussions in the beginning. That's really what it was. It was just stop talking, stop talking, stop talking. And then, unfortunately, NCSF got caught up in that because we said, yes, talk. We want you to air this out. We want you to talk about the patterns of what's happening. But if you're going to report it to the police, it's not helpful to put all the details out in a public forum, because what they want to do when you're in a court is to catch you in inconsistency. So if you air your story first and then have to defend it, well, what did you mean by this word? And what did you mean by this word? It can muddy the waters, and we've seen prosecutors decline to prosecute because people came out on FetLife and talked about everything that happened. So that's the choice of the person who was violated. If they want to come out on FetLife and explain what happened, and that's where they want to actually air this, that's their choice. if they want to actually report it to the police, NCSF will tell them it's better to just wait to air all this on public until after you've had your day in court because it can interfere. So we don't want to silence people, but we want to make sure everybody knows their options and they don't do something that's going to cause problems for them in really getting legal justice later on. So that's that.
So, say, that I don't know the answer to the question, but is there any cases similar to people who use Facebook for that? Because there may be people watching online that don't know what FetLife is, like a Facebook for kinky people. So if there's analogous cases there, that might provide some information about how it works.
Anybody have anything else to say?
I'm all about the court of public opinion, to be honest. I get accused of being a kangaroo court all the time. I bought the Kigu and the judge outfit. I'm fine with that. In my experience, especially trying to help people who are sex workers, who are people of color, who are trans people, go to police and have any justice, they often don't even get their case written down. I have been locked in a room with people reporting rape for hours while their child is at home with an abusive partner. I have had police laugh people I'm advocating for out of the police station. That's why I don't go to the police, because I don't, so infrequently that a rape case even goes to court, much less that any justice is served in that circumstance. So then, if we're using the court of public opinion, and everyone has a lot of opinions, how do you manifest that? Like, how do you work with that? Because yes, false accusations do happen. It does happen. Honestly, the amount of backlash that happens for reporting something is so huge that while they might happen, I would guarantee you that it is a lot less frequent than very real accusations that get dismissed because of false accusation narrative. And to add to that, when I started consent culture, I did a blog carnival of consent violations, and I had people submit stories to me. I didn't realize when I did that I was going to have people submitting stories to me for the entirety of my work at Consent Culture, which was about 4 years. And I got about 200 stories a month. A lot of them involved community leaders. A lot of them involved, what do I do? I can't call this community leader out because I'm going to get banished from the community, which I've definitely witnessed happen before. And so I've had to figure out a lot of different ways. I mean, each circumstance is different, each community is different. You have to look at the context and talk to somebody about their safety in what their options are. I try to give people who come to me the most informed position before they make a decision on what to do next. And I try to give them more agency by giving them multiple options. As for people who are accused who come to me and say, oh my God, what do I do? Which is primarily the work I'm doing now. I have a system for that at this point, which doesn't work all the time, but has been pretty effective, which is say, I'm sorry, say, is there anything that I can do to help right now, which might involve stepping back, it might involve not going to a party for a while, it could involve some unreasonable demands. That is possible. It's really important to me, though, to have that conversation and to open that dialogue, to acknowledge this person's feelings, whether or not you agree with them, doesn't matter, this is their experience, and be vulnerable. I'm a huge fan of radical vulnerability, and I think that what I see happening time and time again is people get accused and they become very defensive. And in my opinion, and in my experience so far, almost every single person who has gotten defensive, it is because they feel that there's some thread of truth in what's being said. And every person who has been like, oh my God, what can I do? They have shown themselves to be interested and invested in learning and educating themselves and doing better next time. So I would say the very first thing is really sit with somebody. If you get accused of something, sit with that information and be like, oh, okay, I need to go back to basics.
I just want to echo everything that Katie said. That was amazing. To just say that the false accusation narrative is part of rape culture.
Yes.
It's part of rape culture. The amount of risk it takes to put yourself out there and say that I was victimized is unbelievable. And people are just not running around on the internet saying, like, to get back at people saying that they've been violated. They're just not.
I also think that the one person that actually made a false accusation, and we were helping the person who was the defendant, and it actually went to the police. That's the one time that we've really seen like a false accusation go to the police, and that person was remanded by the court to mental health therapy. So there is already plenty in place to handle false accusations. It's a very sad thing that the person making the false accusation actually ended up going if they needed it, whereas people who have been assaulted have a hard time finding, being able to get justice. So I think that false accusations in the legal system, they take care of it. We don't have to worry about a ton of people. Even in our survey, 4,500 people, 7 people said that they had been falsely reported to the police. Now I know that that does happen because it happened with us, but it is not an epidemic. It is not how we should be operating from the inception. So now I have a question from online, our online audience. How much do you believe social media and the change of the social culture has benefited the openness to be able to discuss consent activism?
Okay, I have opinions on that. Can I give people some time to speak? I think that there's a lot of ways in which social media has benefited these conversations, often through hashtags. You can find other people who have had similar experiences, and that's been really important. I think it's been important in terms of getting media coverage about these issues. I've also definitely seen it be used as a tool, often by people who have more institutional privilege, to dogpile other people. So, like, I say this all the time, but it's like a hammer, which is a tool. You can either use it to build a house or whack somebody over the head. I feel like social media is very similar. It can be a very helpful and useful tool. It can also be used as a weapon. So, like with pretty much everything else, I just try to get as much data and information as possible, and you know, ask questions and not make any sort of final judgments as much as I can on social media. I do sometimes. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see me put the smack down on occasion. But generally, I try to ask more questions than I answer.
Doris, you have
What I find with social media, especially with domestic violence, is that they tend to come out more when something happens. So you don't hear anything about domestic violence until a victim gets murdered, and then it'll be at the bottom of the screen called domestic violence hotline. And I think that social media could do more as far as putting that information of where a survivor, where a sexual assault, DV, whatever it may be, that if they use that as more informational, not just when something happens.
not just during a tragedy. I think that's a great point. And Toby.
I would say, as someone who kind of grew up around social media, I definitely agree with Kitty that it's a tool. And for me, it's the world that we live in. And I think that sometimes questions about like what can social media do or not do, in some ways becomes more of a generational conversation, because we could have the same thing about like how chat rooms changed this kind of dynamic, or how cell phones, or how the telephone period changes how people can hold conversations around consent. So I think a lot of times it has more to do with how the community responds to that communication tool. And one of the things that I wanted to say to the previous question is that I had an experience where I had experienced abuse, and I wanted to speak about that with my community and my support network and my friends, all of whom were through social media. And it was the kind of dynamic where I did not expect police involvement in any way. Like, having that kind of violence even against my abuser is something that I would not have stood for. And then additionally, it's a terrible system for people like me. But what happened immediately was there was that moment of defensiveness where as soon as I started talking about it, everyone wanted to get the preponderance of evidence. People wanted to actually like interrogate me about what my story was. My abuser got incredibly defensive and was actually the abuse escalated to try to make me quiet. And I think that one of the things that I learned from that experience is I actually would have much, much preferred it if we didn't have a cultural narrative that anyone who violates consent in any way is automatically a monster who should be... Because that was the stakes, it immediately had to become this, oh, we need to hold a trial, and everyone had to demand of me my story that I didn't want to tell again and again and again, and I didn't even, you know, there's plenty of people, you don't deserve to know my story. And so, as I take actions, especially with social media and the way that there's these call-out moments that some people just get dismissed from the community, is that I purposely do not demand that people in my community are 100%. And sometimes that means that people in my community get called out for violations of consent, and everyone shuns them, and I still talk to them. And I think that is important too, because oftentimes people need to have those conversations, and that's how we can grow and do better. And oftentimes too, because a lot of the people who are violating consent are coming from their own histories of trauma. And I can't tell you the number of times when someone got isolated from the community and for something, you know, unforgivable that they've done. And then later, years down the road, hear from them some of the stories about their experiences of violation that were tied into or involved in all of that. And I feel it's important to like, at least when I'm not directly impacted by that, be able to be there for those community members as well.
I think that's a great point. I mean, we've seen it with consent violations. It's such a broad term. Accidents, misunderstandings, you know, it's a bad breakup, it's predators, it's, people manipulating, it's people coercing. I mean, there's a lot of different degrees of this, and I think that even people who are doing manipulation, coercion, education can always have an impact on that.
And I would also say that there's a disproportionate impact where it's the people of color, it's the trans people, it's the sex workers who one call out gets their life turned upside down and completely excluded from community. But the people who are coming from experiences of extreme privilege can violate consent again and again and again, and even be called out for it, but not have like their standing in the community challenged in the same way.
We have a question from the online, and then I'm going to do Ruby as well. Does this follow on to this?
I was just going to add the social media aspect that, like, a lot of times when people are posting on social media, they're still processing through. It's an anonymous space, but usually the assumption is I'm not going to be judged because you don't have space to put space to respond to you. So the trolling that can happen in response to that can be a huge problem. And so when you see posts like that, I really encourage people to respond to these resources, not ask questions about, like, be judge and jury, but if you are aware of resources, provide that, because the other thing, maybe that person is posting on social media because they don't have immediate support in their own personal space and personal life, and that's really important.
I think that's a really good point. We're not the judge and jury here. We just really need to be helping people find the resources, and it's just always shocking to me that most people just don't even know the resources that are available when something like this happens. I think that's a really good point. And this actually, the online question, goes right with that. And they actually wanted us to ask Doris as well, is there a classes structure to social media and reporting and awareness of domestic violence? Do you see class come into that?
Well, we know domestic violence can happen to anyone. Right. And so, women of color reporting, that was talking about reporting. Yeah. Women of color reporting is so underreported because of the treatment that one woman of color may get from law enforcement. So when we look at different areas, you know, it is a cost difference of what will be reported in Bellevue to what may be reported in South Seattle, and what that response may be from reporting, even in social media, things that happen in the African American community. You might see it on the news for 1 second, it'll flash. But you will see something that happened in a different area, and it'll be ongoing on news coverage. When we talk about the social media piece of even if we were to put it on Facebook or something in that type of social media, it's still, we're not going to step up to reporting as quickly because of the backlash, because of the treatment, because of the disproportionate piece of women just know what that can mean. They could be arrested, abusers could be arrested, or they only wanted that abuser person to be removed from the situation. That abuser person could end up being notified.
So I think that one thing we also want to get to here is, where groups in our communities have different views on consent issues, how can we work together to kind of, should we work together to have the similar view? Should we honor space to have all these different views of how to deal with this? Or should we really be working to cooperation? I know NCSF works to cooperation. We try to work with every group out there. We don't want to change them to think of it just like us, but we do want to make sure that we have touch with every different community, and as well as the legal community, the judicial community, the victim advocacies, the therapists, lawyers. We want to try to make sure we have touch with all those different communities so we understand how they view this plan. I think Kitty said something very interesting. Kitty and I were having a battle online at one point, early on in the naming name, and Kitty was the one who was like, I'm just going to talk to her and find out what's really going on, and she actually picked up the phone to talk to me. And I think it was a big, I know.
And I never talk on the phone.
She actually sent me a private message first and said, maybe we could talk. And I was like, yes, I would love that. Because I'm always trying to find out more about what people are thinking. And just making that little bridge was huge for us, because then I got the benefit of her experience with all of our facts. I was able to send her stuff, and I'm still sending her stuff, so that she can look at it. So creating a little bridge, I think, is really important sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think cooperation, for me, is definitely ideal, because there are very different techniques that work for very different communities, and it's important to make space for that. I don't think that there could be a consensus, for example, when some communities are very focused on the legal and the prison industrial complex, and then activist communities are not wanting to involve that at all. And prison industrial complex is really safe for some people, and it's extremely dangerous for other people. So, I think that cooperation at least allows you to see these things as a spectrum and say, okay, well, here's something that's way over here that might fit your purpose, or if you want something that's more middling, there's this, and if you want something that's more over here, there's that. Because everybody has different techniques, and the more we can spread the net as wide as possible, the more of these things we can actually deal with.
I have so many things swimming in my brain. It just, the question brought to mind to me, this friend of mine who has been very, very outspoken, specifically on social media, about being angry at feminists and angry at these various people, specifically women. She is female, cis female herself. Because of these radical, like, blanket statements, like all women experience street harassment, or, you know, something like that. Because for her personally, she hasn't experienced a lot of things that people say that all women experience. And so it just makes me think of, like, yes, cooperation, indeed, because of all these differences across communities or groups, but then also within those groups, there's going to be difference, whether it's opinion or style or whatever. And I told her, like, those blanket statements are important because we have been raised in this culture that values consent, especially when it comes from females or female-presenting people, and that then having a blanket statement helps people to see, oh, like, is it really that big, or is it like this little thing, you know, like, oh, it's only a handful of people. Like, no, it's not a handful of people. It may not be all, but it's damn near all. So, just, yeah. That's
interesting. I would just add to that, like, also people's tolerance levels are totally different. So, like, what might be street harassment to one person would be totally fine for somebody else. Like, if somebody's catcalling you, some people are like, yeah, that makes me feel really good. It makes me feel positive. Other people are like, wow, that's really violating, and now I'm kind of scared that this person's going to follow me home. So, you know, I think that is why multiple approaches is really important.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about restorative justice. We're almost at the end, but I think that it's become such a big way of dealing with issues like this, focusing on the rehabilitation of offenders through some sort of reconciliation with the person that they violated, as well as the community. There's a lot of different ideas behind this, but in what ways do you think restorative justice has a place in our consent initiative?
I mean, I think, you know, a theme we've had this whole panel has been the legal system and the law and jail. And I think one of the things that is really important for me to recognize is that jails are a terrible violation of consent, right? As long as we're talking about consent, we have to realize that if you're going to, you know, send someone to, send isn't even the right word, have someone be physically restrained and put in restraints and have typically larger, stronger people with guns come and forcibly move them from one place where they have support and community to another place where they have no support and community, and where violations of consent are just a given. That is huge, right? Like, I think there are some situations where even like a night in jail can, like, we don't give that the weight that it should be. Like, a night in jail is a greater violation of consent than some of the violations of consent that end up getting discussed in situations like this. And so when we're looking at that, I think having restorative justice as an option, as a way to deal with some of these situations is great. But I also want to make a distinction between the questions of using jail as a response to people who violate consent, which is one whole conversation on its own, versus using jail for people whose consent was hypothetically violated. And I think, like, it really concerns me when we have conversations about jail or the threat of jail being used against people because their consent was violated, or because they are told their consent doesn't matter. And so when we're talking about, early on the panel there was a discussion about using jail as a threat to force people into education programs that they don't want to be in, and say, you can either be in this education program, or you can have large men with guns physically restrain you and put you in a hole where other people are going to violate you. That is something that really bothers and concerns me.
Thank you, Courtney. I just want to add to that and reiterate for people who may not have heard my keynote that I feel like in part of what restorative justice is also wading through all the muck and being able to see yourself as either the violator or the violated is really important, I think. And it's a way to kind of break down this notion that there's bad and there's good, and you're on one side or the other, which I just think isn't true. And that's why I said, and, you know, like, I have violated someone's consent, and people think that I'm, you know, an upstanding member of society, right, generally. So, I mean, I don't know what your job to do, but that's what people say to me in my face. And so I feel like we have to continually say that. We have to continually say, like, there's culpability here, and again, that the way that we live in a culture of violence, and so it's all a cycle. I mean, what Toby just described is like, you violated my consent, so I'm going to send you somewhere where they'll really violate your consent. Like, what is the logic of that, right? But it is a cycle of violence, and again, in order to break that cycle of violence, we have to come to terms with our own traumas. If we have a grip on our traumas and all of the wounds that we're like carrying around all the time and putting on other people, then we can actually try to heal some of this.
Because you're healing it in yourself.
Yeah.
By acknowledging the fact that you have this trauma. And again, acknowledging it is a big point. So I think we all need to work together a little bit better on these things. I love the fact that we're working together across community lines here. I picked up several different things in this. I don't know about you guys, but I love this idea of going where the people are. And at Apex, I'm going to say, hey, why don't we put out flyers in the Latino community? We'll make sure and make it so it's something that's not scary and something that's inclusive, and we'll go to their community. So we'll put this out. And in Spanish, which we're MTSF translating our brochures to Spanish as fast as we can find volunteers to do that for us. But I think that's all really important stuff, and I hope that you also got some points out of this as well. So thank you. This is really cool.